You pathetic little gold digger, Derek Hawthorne snarled, his usually pristine appearance disheveled from too much whiskey. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I wouldn't hear about your little affair? Isabella Martinez stumbled backward, her hand flying to her reddening cheek, emerald eyes wide with shock and humiliation. The 150 wedding guests gasped collectively, phones already emerging from purses and jacket pockets. Isabella's sister Maria had just married her college sweetheart in what was supposed to be the perfect fairy tale wedding, and now Isabella stood in the center of the dance floor like a spectacle, her flowing navy bridesmaid dress suddenly feeling like a target. "Derek, stop!" Isabella whispered, backing away from her ex-fiancé, who had somehow managed to sneak into the reception despite not being invited. "You're drunk. You don't know what you're saying." "Don't I?" Derek's blue eyes blazed with fury as he stalked toward her, completely oblivious to the crowd forming around them. 3 months, Isabella. 3 months since you called off our engagement, and I finally found out why. You've been sleeping with that businessman, haven't you? The one with the Italian restaurant chain? Isabella's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She hadn't been sleeping with anyone. She'd called off their engagement because Derek had become controlling and possessive, demanding to know her whereabouts every moment of every day. But explaining that now, in front of her sister's wedding guests, felt impossible. "Derek, please," she tried again, glancing desperately toward the head table where Maria sat frozen in her wedding dress, tears threatening to spill down her carefully made-up cheeks. "This is Maria's day. Whatever issues you have with me, we can discuss them later, privately." "No!" Derek's voice rose to a shout, and several of the male guests began moving closer, sensing the situation was escalating. "I'm done with your lies, Isabella. I'm done with you making me look like a fool." He raised his hand again, and Isabella flinched, closing her eyes and bracing for another blow. But instead of the impact she expected, she heard a voice that seemed to cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "Touch her again, and it will be the last thing you ever do." The voice was low, controlled, but carried an unmistakable threat that made the hair on Isabella's arms stand up. She opened her eyes to see a tall figure stepping between her and Derek, a man she'd never seen before, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He was perhaps in his mid-30s, with jet black hair swept back from a face that belonged on the cover of a magazine. If magazines featured men who looked like they could kill you with their bare hands and still make it home in time for dinner. His olive-toned skin suggested Mediterranean heritage, and when he turned, slightly, Isabella caught a glimpse of dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets deeper than the ocean. "Who the hell are you?" Derek demanded, though his voice had lost some of its earlier bravado. Something about this stranger's presence seemed to command respect, or at least caution. The man didn't answer Derek immediately. Instead, he turned to Isabella, his expression softening just a fraction. "Are you hurt?" His voice carried the faintest trace of an Italian accent, and Isabella found herself nodding numbly, still touching her stinging cheek. "I asked you a question," Derek pressed, but his voice cracked slightly. "This is none of your business." Now the stranger turned back to Derek, and Isabella saw Derek actually take a step backward. "I'm making it my business," the man said calmly. "A real man doesn't raise his hand to a woman. Boys who haven't learned that lesson tend to have accidents." The way he said the word accidents made Isabella's blood run cold, but not with fear of him, with fear for Derek, who seemed too drunk and too angry to recognize the danger he was in. "Are you threatening me?" Derek puffed up his chest, trying to regain his composure. "Do you know who I am? My father owns half the commercial real estate in this city." The stranger smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "How nice for Daddy. I own the other half." He stepped closer to Derek, and though he wasn't significantly taller, something about his presence made Derek seem to shrink. "Along with several other interests that I'm sure your father wouldn't want to hear about his son interfering with." Isabella watched the color drain from Derek's face. She didn't understand what was happening, but clearly Derek did. You're, Derek stammered. I'm someone who doesn't like to repeat himself, the stranger said softly. So when I tell you to leave this beautiful woman alone, and to never come within 100 feet of her again, I trust you'll remember that conversation, won't you? Derek looked around the circle of guests, all of whom were staring at him with a mixture of disgust and fascination. His eyes found Isabella's, and for a moment she saw something that might have been regret, but it was quickly replaced by wounded pride. "This isn't over," he muttered, but he was already backing toward the exit. "Yes," the stranger said pleasantly. "It is." Derek practically ran from the reception hall, leaving behind a buzz of excited whispers and the kind of drama that would fuel neighborhood gossip for months. Isabella stood there still in shock as the crowd slowly began to disperse. Her sister Maria rushed over, wedding dress rustling. "Bella, are you okay? I'm so sorry. I had no idea he would show up here. The security was supposed to keep him out." Maria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I can't believe he hit you. At my wedding." "It's not your fault," Isabella assured her sister, pulling her into a hug. "And don't let this ruin your perfect day. Look, everyone's already going back to dancing and drinking. By tomorrow, they'll be talking about how romantic your first dance was, not about Derek's meltdown." But even as she comforted Maria, Isabella's eyes kept drifting to the mysterious man who had intervened. He had stepped back to give the sisters privacy, but he hadn't left. Instead, he stood near the bar, a glass of what looked like expensive whiskey in his hand, watching her with those unreadable dark eyes. "Who is that?" Maria whispered, following Isabella's gaze. "I don't remember putting him on the guest list." "I don't know," Isabella admitted. "But I need to thank him." She squeezed Maria's hand and walked over to where the man waited. Up close, he was even more intimidating, and more attractive. His suit was definitely Italian, probably custom-made, and it fit him like it had been painted on. A gold watch that looked like it cost more than Isabella's car glinted at his wrist. "Thank you," she said simply. "I don't know who you are, but what you did, thank you." He inclined his head slightly. "No thanks necessary. I simply cannot stand to see a woman mistreated." He extended his hand. "Dante Rossini." Isabella took his hand, noting the firm grip and the way her skin seemed to tingle at the contact. "Isabella Martinez. But you probably heard that during Derek's performance." "Isabella." The way he said her name, with that slight Italian inflection, made her stomach flutter in a way it hadn't in months. A beautiful name for a beautiful woman. She felt herself blushing, and was grateful for the dim lighting. "Are you a friend of the groom? I don't think I've seen you around before." Dante smiled, and this time it did reach his eyes, transforming his entire face. "I'm new to the area. I have business interests in the city, and I was invited by a mutual acquaintance. I hope you don't mind the intrusion." "Mind? You saved me from... Well, I don't know what Derek might have done if you hadn't stepped in." Isabella realized she was still holding his hand and reluctantly let go. "Can I buy you a drink? It's the least I can do." "I would be honored," Dante said. "But perhaps not here. Your sister's celebration should be the focus tonight, not the drama that just unfolded. Would you allow me to take you to dinner tomorrow evening instead?" Isabella hesitated. Everything about Dante Rossini screamed danger. The expensive clothes, the way Derek had reacted to whatever he'd whispered, the casual confidence with which he'd handled the situation. But he'd protected her when no one else had stepped forward, and there was something magnetic about him that she couldn't ignore. Yes, she heard herself saying. "I'd like that." Dante reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, thick, expensive paper with elegant lettering that simply read, "Dante Rossini," and a phone number. No business name, no title. "I'll call you tomorrow to arrange the details," he said. "For now, go enjoy your sister's party. And Isabella?" He leaned closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and masculine that made her head spin. "If that boy bothers you again before tomorrow night, call me immediately." Then he was gone, melting into the crowd and disappearing so smoothly that Isabella almost wondered if she'd imagined the entire encounter. Almost, but the business card in her hand and the lingering scent of his cologne proved otherwise. The rest of the wedding reception passed in a blur. Isabella danced with her cousins, caught up with old friends, and helped Maria with her dress when she needed to use the restroom, but her mind kept drifting to Dante Rossini. Who was he? What kind of business interest did he have? And why had Derek looked like he'd seen a ghost when Dante had whispered to him? She tried Googling his name when she got home to her small apartment that night, but found almost nothing. A few business licenses for companies she'd never heard of, a mention in a newspaper article about a charity fundraiser, but no personal information, no social media profiles, nothing that gave her any real insight into who he was. The next morning brought flowers, 24 white roses delivered to her apartment with a card that simply read, "Until tonight." D. Isabella buried her face in the blooms, inhaling their sweet fragrance and wondering what she was getting herself into. Her best friend Carmen came over that afternoon, ostensibly to hear about the wedding drama, but really to help Isabella pick out an outfit for her mysterious dinner date. "So let me get this straight," Carmen said, rifling through Isabella's closet. "This gorgeous, obviously wealthy stranger appears out of nowhere, scares off Derek so badly that he practically wet himself, and then asks you out?" "That's about the size of it," Isabella confirmed, sitting cross-legged on her bed. "And you said yes because—" Isabella considered the question. "Because Derek was about to hit me again, and Dante stopped him. Because he was kind to me when he didn't have to be. And because—" She trailed off. "Because he's probably the most attractive man you've ever seen in real life?" Carmen supplied. "That doesn't hurt," Isabella admitted with a laugh. "But Carmen, there was something about him. The way he carried himself, the way Derek reacted. I think he might be dangerous." Carmen paused in her examination of a little black dress. "Dangerous how? Like serial killer dangerous or bad boy dangerous? I don't know, maybe both." Isabella flopped back on the bed. "I should cancel, shouldn't I? I should stay home and watch Netflix and forget this ever happened." "Absolutely not," Carmen declared, pulling out an emerald green dress that Isabella had bought for a work party and never worn. "When was the last time you felt genuinely excited about a man? Not comfortable, not settling, but actually excited?" Isabella thought about her relationship with Derek. 3 years of gradually feeling like she was suffocating, of making herself smaller to avoid his jealousy and controlling behavior. Before Derek, there had been a string of perfectly nice, perfectly boring men who had treated her well, but never made her heart race. "It's been a while," she admitted. "Then you're going on this date," Carmen said firmly. "Wear this dress, those black heels that make your legs look a mile long, and that red lipstick you save for special occasions. And if he turns out to be a creep, you text me, and I'll come rescue you." 2 hours later, Isabella stood in front of her bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The emerald dress hugged her curves in all the right places. The heels added 4 inches to her 5'6" frame, and the red lipstick made her feel bold and sophisticated. Her long, dark hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and she'd kept her makeup elegant but striking. Dante had told her he would pick her up at 7, but Isabella was too nervous to wait in her apartment. She stationed herself by the front window of her building at 6:45, watching for— well, she wasn't sure what she was watching for. At exactly 7 o'clock, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. Not just any sedan, a car that probably cost more than Isabella made in 2 years. The driver got out and walked around to the passenger side, but before he could reach for the handle, Dante himself emerged from the back seat. Isabella's breath caught. If she'd thought he looked good in his wedding attire, it was nothing compared to how he looked now. He wore a navy suit that was somehow even more perfectly tailored than the one from the night before, with a crisp white shirt and no tie. His dark hair was styled just enough to look effortless, and when he looked up at her building, scanning the windows until his eyes found hers, his smile was devastating. She grabbed her purse and practically ran downstairs, not wanting to keep him waiting, but also eager to see him again. The doorman held the building entrance open for her, and then Dante was there, taking her hand and helping her into the car like she was made of spun glass. "You look breathtaking," he said as the driver closed the door behind them, and Isabella felt warmth spread through her chest at the genuine admiration in his voice. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." She settled into the leather seat, trying not to gawk at the car's luxurious interior. "Where are we going?" "A little place I know," Dante said mysteriously. "I hope you trust me." The little place turned out to be the most exclusive restaurant in the city, the kind of establishment where reservations were booked months in advance and celebrities went when they wanted to avoid paparazzi. Isabella had read about it in magazines but never imagined she'd actually eat there. "Mr. Rossini," the maitre d' greeted them personally. "Your usual table is ready." They were led to a private corner table with a view of the city lights, the kind of spot that was probably reserved for VIPs and people who spent more on dinner than most people spent on rent. "This is incredible," Isabella said as Dante held her chair for her. "How did you get a reservation here on such short notice?" Dante's smile was enigmatic as he took his seat across from her. "I have a few connections in the restaurant business." The waiter appeared immediately with a wine list, but Dante waved it away. "The Barolo, 2015, he said simply, and the waiter nodded and disappeared. "You seem very comfortable here," Isabella observed, looking around at the elegant decor and sophisticated clientele. "I appreciate beautiful things," Dante replied, but his eyes were on her face, not the restaurant. Excellence in all its forms. The wine arrived, and after the ritual of tasting and approval, they were left alone with menus and flickering candlelight. "So," Isabella said, taking a sip of wine that probably cost more than she usually spent on a week's worth of groceries, "tell me about these business interests of yours." "Import and export, primarily," Dante said easily. "My family has been in business for several generations. We deal in specialty items, things that require a personal touch and attention to detail." It was a polite non-answer, Isabella realized, but she didn't press. Instead, she found herself talking about her own work as a graphic designer, her close relationship with her sister, her love of art and cooking. Dante listened with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions and making her feel like she was the only person in the room. "You're very close to your sister," he observed as their appetizers arrived. "She's my only family," Isabella explained. "Our parents died in a car accident when I was 22 and Maria was 19. We only had each other after that." Something shifted in Dante's expression, a softness she hadn't seen before. "I'm sorry for your loss. Family is everything. There's nothing more important than protecting the people you love." The way he said it made Isabella think there was a story there, but before she could ask, he was steering the conversation in a different direction, asking about her art and her dreams for the future. Dinner passed in what felt like minutes, but must have been hours. The food was exquisite, the wine was perfect, and Dante was everything. Charming and sophisticated, but with an underlying intensity that made Isabella's pulse race. He was clearly wealthy and well-connected, but he didn't flaunt it or make her feel out of place. Most importantly, he listened to her, really listened, as if her thoughts and opinions mattered to him. "Would you like to see the city from my apartment?" he asked as they finished sharing a decadent chocolate dessert. "I have a penthouse not far from here. The view is spectacular." Isabella knew it was a line. She knew that going to his apartment was dangerous for about a dozen different reasons, but she also knew that she didn't want the evening to end, and that she trusted this man who had protected her from Derek, even though she barely knew him. "I'd like that," she said. Dante's building was in the most expensive part of the city, all glass and steel and modern luxury. His penthouse occupied the entire top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city sprawled out below them like a carpet of diamonds. "This is incredible," Isabella breathed, walking to the windows. The apartment itself was stunning. All clean lines and expensive furniture, with artwork that looked like it belonged in a museum. But the view was what took her breath away. "I'm glad you like it," Dante said, coming to stand behind her. She could feel the warmth of his body, could smell his cologne. And when she turned around, she found herself trapped between the window and his broad chest. "Dante," she whispered, but she wasn't sure if it was a protest or an invitation. He reached up to cup her face gently, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly, "and I will." Instead of answering, Isabella rose up on her tiptoes and kissed him. The kiss started soft and tentative, but within seconds it had become something hungry and desperate. Dante's arms came around her, pulling her against him, and Isabella felt like she was drowning in sensation. He tasted like wine and chocolate and something that was uniquely him. And when his hands tangled in her hair, she made a soft sound of pleasure that seemed to drive him wild. They broke apart finally, both breathing hard, and Isabella realized that she was in serious trouble. This wasn't just attraction. This was something deeper, more dangerous than anything she'd ever felt before. "Stay with me tonight," Dante murmured against her lips. Isabella wanted to. God, she wanted to more than she'd wanted anything in years. But some last vestige of common sense held her back. "I can't," she whispered. I don't do this. I don't sleep with men I barely know." Dante smiled and kissed her forehead gently. "Then I'll wait," he said simply. "However long it takes." He called her a car to take her home, but not before kissing her goodnight in a way that left her knees weak and her resolve crumbling. Over the next 2 weeks, Dante courted her like a man from another era. He sent flowers to her office, took her to art galleries and the theater, cooked dinner for her in his spectacular kitchen. He was attentive and romantic and passionate, but he never pushed, never made her feel pressured or uncomfortable. Isabella found herself falling harder and faster than she'd ever fallen for anyone. Dante was unlike any man she'd ever known, sophisticated and worldly, but also surprisingly tender. He remembered everything, she told him, from her favorite flowers to her coffee order, to the fact that she was allergic to shellfish. He listened to her talk about her work with genuine interest and offered thoughtful advice when she was struggling with a difficult client. But there were still mysteries. His phone rang at odd hours, and he would step away to take calls in Italian, speaking in low, urgent tones. Sometimes men in expensive suits would appear at restaurants where they were dining, exchanging brief words with Dante before disappearing again. And there was the night she'd stayed late at his apartment, falling asleep on his couch while watching a movie, only to wake up at 2 a.m. to hear him on a phone call that sounded decidedly unlike any legitimate business conversation. "The shipment from Naples needs to be handled personally," she'd heard him saying. "And Marco, if there are any more problems with the Colombians, we handle it the old way. Capiche?" Isabella had pretended to still be asleep when he came back to the living room, but her mind had been racing. What kind of import-side-export business required handling problems the old way with Colombians? What kind of shipments from Naples needed personal attention at 2 a.m? She tried to convince herself that she was overthinking things, that there were plenty of legitimate explanations for what she'd overheard. But deep down, she was beginning to suspect that Dante Rossini was involved in something far more dangerous than international trade. The confirmation came 3 weeks after their first date, in the most unexpected way possible. Isabella was leaving her office building after working late on a project when she noticed the van. Black, with tinted windows, parked across the street in a spot that had been empty when she'd looked out her office window an hour earlier. Something about it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up, and she quickly walked toward the parking garage where her car was parked. She made it halfway across the street when she heard footsteps behind her, moving faster than they should be for a casual pedestrian. Isabella's heart began to race, and she broke into a run, her heels clicking against the pavement as she headed for the well-lit garage entrance. She almost made it. Strong hands grabbed her from behind, and Isabella opened her mouth to scream just as something that smelled sickeningly sweet was pressed over her nose and mouth. The world went gray around the edges, and the last thing she remembered was being dragged toward the black van. Isabella woke up in darkness, her head pounding and her mouth tasting like cotton. She was sitting in a chair, her hands tied behind her back, in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. Dim light filtered in through grimy windows, and she could hear the sound of traffic in the distance. "She's awake," a voice said from somewhere behind her, and Isabella's blood ran cold. She recognized that voice. Derek stepped into view, but he looked different than he had at Maria's wedding. Thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, and a desperate edge that made him seem dangerous in a way he'd never been before. "Hello, Isabella," he said, pulling up another chair and sitting down directly in front of her. "Miss me?" "Derek, what is this?" Isabella tried to keep her voice steady, but fear made it shake. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you ruined my life," Derek said matter-of-factly. "Do you know what happened to me after your boyfriend threatened me at the wedding? Do you know what my life has been like for the past month?" Isabella stared at him, not understanding. "My father's business started having problems," Derek continued. "Permits that should have been rubber-stamped suddenly required additional review. Loans that were guaranteed got mysteriously held up. Suppliers we'd worked with for years suddenly couldn't fulfill our orders." His voice was rising with each word. "Everything fell apart, Isabella. Everything. And it's all because of you and that psychopath you're sleeping with." "I don't understand," Isabella said, though she was beginning to have a terrible suspicion that she did. "Dante Rossini," Derek spat. "Do you know who he really is, Isabella? Do you have any idea what kind of man you've been playing house with?" When Isabella didn't answer, Derek laughed bitterly. "He's Mafia, you stupid girl. Cosa Nostra. His family controls half the illegal activity on the East Coast, and the other half pays them tribute." Derek leaned forward, his eyes wild. "And you've been his little pet for a month, completely clueless about what he really does for a living." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. Mafia. It explained everything. The expensive lifestyle, the mysterious phone calls, the way Derek had reacted at the wedding, the problems with Derek's father's business afterward. Dante wasn't just dangerous, he was a criminal. "So here's what's going to happen," Derek continued. "You're going to call your boyfriend and tell him that if he doesn't back off and let my family's business recover, something very unfortunate is going to happen to you. You're going to be my insurance policy, Isabella. My guarantee that Dante Rossini learns there are consequences for destroying innocent people's lives." "Derek, you don't understand what you're doing," Isabella said desperately. "If Dante is really what you say he is, then kidnapping me isn't going to make him back down. It's going to make him come after you." "Let him come," Derek said with false bravado. "I'm not afraid of him anymore. I've got nothing left to lose." That, Isabella realized, was what made him so dangerous. A man with nothing to lose was capable of anything. Derek pulled out her cell phone, which he'd apparently taken while she was unconscious. "Call him," he demanded. "Tell him exactly what I told you to say." With shaking fingers, Isabella dialed Dante's number. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for her call. "Isabella, I was expecting you an hour ago. Where are you?" The concern in his voice made her chest ache. Whatever else Dante might be, his feelings for her seemed genuine. "Dante," she said, looking at Derek's expectant face, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I've been kidnapped." "What?" The temperature in Dante's voice dropped about 20 degrees. "Where are you? Who has you?" "Derek," Isabella said. "He wants you to stop interfering with his father's business, or he's going to hurt me." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute and terrifying. "Put him on the phone," Dante said finally, and his voice was so calm it was frightening. Derek grabbed the phone eagerly. "Rossini, this is Derek Hawthorne. I think we need to have a conversation about—" Derek suddenly went very pale, then very red, as Dante's voice rose loud enough for Isabella to hear it from across the small space. "No, you listen to me, you pathetic little worm," Dante was saying. "You have exactly 1 hour to return her to me unharmed. If she has so much as a bruise, I will take you apart piece by piece and feed what's left to the fish in the harbor. If she's seriously hurt, I will do the same thing to everyone you've ever cared about. And if she's dead," the pause was loaded with menace, "let's just say that your family will curse your name for generations." Derek ended the call with shaking hands. He's bluffing," Derek said, but he didn't sound convinced. "He can't just People don't actually do things like that in real life. Derek, Isabella said gently, I think you need to let me go. Right now, before this gets any worse. But Derek had gone beyond the reach of reason. He paced back and forth in front of her, muttering to himself about respect and consequences, and showing people they couldn't be pushed around. Isabella lost track of time, but it felt like much less than an hour before she heard cars outside the warehouse. Multiple cars, moving fast and stopping abruptly. Derek heard them too. His face went white with panic, and he pulled out a gun that he held with shaking hands. This is your fault, he said to Isabella. All of this is your fault. The warehouse doors exploded inward, and suddenly the space was full of men in dark clothing. But Isabella only had eyes for one of them. Dante moved through the chaos like a force of nature, his face a mask of controlled fury that was more terrifying than any rage she'd ever seen. He took in the situation at a glance, Isabella tied to the chair, Derek with the gun, and his expression went from furious to absolutely murderous. Let her go, Dante said quietly, but his voice carried clearly through the warehouse. Now! Stay back! Derek shouted, swinging the gun wildly between Isabella and the men who had surrounded him. I'll kill her. I swear I'll kill her. No, Dante said with absolute certainty. You won't. What happened next occurred so quickly that Isabella barely saw it. One of Dante's men threw something, a wrench, maybe, or a piece of metal pipe, and Derek instinctively turned toward the sound. In that split second of distraction, Dante moved. He covered the distance between them faster than should have been humanly possible, disarming Derek and putting him on the ground in one fluid motion. The gun went skittering across the concrete floor, and Derek lay crumpled and moaning, clutching what was obviously a broken arm. Then Dante was beside Isabella, cutting through the ropes that bound her with a knife that appeared in his hand as if by magic. Are you hurt? He asked urgently, his hands roaming over her arms and face, checking for injuries. Did he touch you? Did he hurt you? I'm okay, Isabella managed, even though she was shaking like a leaf. Dante, I'm okay. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt some of the tension leave his body. I thought I'd lost you, he murmured into her hair. When I got that call, Madonna Mia, I thought I'd lost you. What do you want us to do with him, boss? One of the other men asked, nudging Derek with his foot. Dante's arms tightened around Isabella, and when he spoke, his voice was ice cold with fury. Take him somewhere quiet. Make sure he understands that if he ever comes within 100 miles of Isabella again, if he ever even thinks about her, I will know. And then I will show him what happens to men who threaten what belongs to me. Isabella shivered at the casual menace in his voice, but she didn't protest. Derek had kidnapped her, had threatened to kill her, and part of her wanted him to pay for that. As Dante's men dragged Derek away, Dante finally loosened his hold on Isabella enough to look at her properly. We need to get you to a hospital, he said, studying her face with worried eyes. You need to be checked out. I'm fine, Isabella insisted, just scared, and I want to go home. My home or yours? Dante asked, and Isabella realized that somehow, without her quite noticing, his apartment had started feeling more like home than her own. Yours, she said. The ride back to Dante's building passed in silence. Isabella sat curled against Dante's side, trying to process everything that had happened, while he made a series of phone calls in rapid Italian. She caught enough words to understand that he was making sure Derek would never be a problem again, and that the aftermath of the evening would be thoroughly cleaned up. It wasn't until they were back in Dante's apartment, and he was pouring her a glass of brandy with shaking hands, that Isabella realized the full implications of what Derek had told her. Is it true? She asked quietly. Dante went very still. Is what true? What Derek said about you, about your family, about what you do for a living. Dante set down the brandy decanter and turned to face her fully. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides. What did he tell you? That you're Mafia, Isabella said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. That your family controls organized crime on the East Coast. That the reason Derek's father's business fell apart was because you made it happen. Dante was quiet for a long moment, and Isabella found herself holding her breath. Yes, he said finally. It's true. The simple admission hit her like a punch to the gut. She'd been hoping, even after everything, that there was some explanation, some way that Derek had been wrong. All of it, she whispered. All of it. Dante's voice was carefully controlled. My family has been in business for 4 generations. I inherited the position when my father was killed 3 years ago. And yes, I made Derek Hawthorne's father's life very difficult after he touched you at your sister's wedding. Isabella sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her. You're a criminal. I'm a businessman, Dante corrected quietly. I don't deal drugs, I don't hurt innocent people, and I don't prey on the weak. My family provides services that people want, and we protect our territory and our interests. Sometimes that requires harsh measures. You kill people, Isabella said, and it wasn't a question. Dante's jaw tightened. Sometimes. When they threaten my family, or try to take what's mine. When they leave me no choice. Isabella thought about Derek, about the casual way Dante had spoken of making him disappear. Are you going to kill Derek? Do you want me to? Dante asked, and something in his voice made her look up at him sharply. What? He kidnapped you. He threatened to kill you. If you want him dead, I'll have it done tonight. Dante's expression was completely serious. If you want him to simply disappear, never to bother you again, I can arrange that too. Or, if you want him scared enough that he'll never even think your name again, that can be accomplished. It's your choice, Isabella. What do you want? The fact that he was asking her, that he was giving her the power to decide another person's fate, should have been horrifying. And it was. But it was also something else. Something that made heat pool low in her belly and her heart race. I want him to leave me alone, she said finally, but I don't want him dead. Dante nodded as if she'd made a perfectly reasonable request. Then that's what will happen. They stared at each other across the expensive living room, and Isabella realized that they were at a crossroads. Everything had changed in the space of a few hours. She could no longer pretend that she didn't know what Dante was, could no longer rationalize away the signs she'd been ignoring. I should go, she said quietly. Pain flashed across Dante's features, quickly hidden. If that's what you want. Is it safe for me to leave, I mean? Will there be consequences because of what happened tonight? You'll be protected, Dante said immediately. For the rest of your life, if necessary. No one will ever hurt you again because of me. Isabella believed him. Whatever else Dante might be, she knew he would keep her safe. I need time, she said. I need to think about all of this. Dante nodded stiffly. I'll have you driven home. But as Isabella stood to leave, she found she couldn't make herself walk toward the door. Instead, she turned back to look at him. Did you mean it? She asked. When you said I belonged to you? Dante's eyes blazed. Every word. Even knowing that I might not be able to accept what you are? Even then. His voice was rough with emotion. Isabella, I know what I'm asking of you. I know what kind of life I'm offering. But I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you. You make me want to be a better man. You saved me tonight, Isabella said softly. Whatever else you might be, you came for me. You saved me. I would burn down the world to keep you safe, Dante said simply, and Isabella knew he meant it literally. She walked back to him, close enough to touch, and reached up to cup his face in her hands. I'm scared, she whispered. Of me? Isabella thought about it. Really considered the question. No, she realized. Not of you. Of this. Of how I feel about you. of what it means that even knowing what you are, I don't want to leave." "Then don't," Dante said, covering her hands with his. "Stay with me, Isabella. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." "It won't be easy," Isabella warned. "I'm not sure I can just pretend that I don't know about the other parts of your life." "I would never ask you to," Dante assured her. "I won't lie to you, and I won't hide what I am. But I can promise you that you'll never see the worst of it. You'll never be put in danger because of me again." Isabella thought about Derek, about how helpless she'd felt when he'd been hitting her at the wedding, and how safe she'd felt when Dante had stepped between them. She thought about the past month, about how cherished and protected Dante had made her feel, about how, for the first time in her life, she'd felt like she was with a man who was strong enough to take care of both of them. "I love you," she said, and watched his face transform with wonder and relief. "Ti amo anch'io," Dante murmured, pulling her into his arms. "I love you too. More than my own life." When he kissed her this time, there was nothing tentative about it. It was a claiming, a promise, a declaration of ownership that should have terrified her, but instead made her feel like she was finally, truly, home. "Stay with me tonight," Dante said against her lips. "Not just tonight. Stay with me." "Yes," Isabella whispered, and gave herself over to the dangerous, passionate, all-consuming love of a very dangerous man. 6 months later, Isabella stood in the bridal suite of the most exclusive hotel in the city, looking at herself in the mirror and hardly believing what she saw. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of Italian silk and French lace, custom-made by a designer whose name she'd only ever seen in magazines. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, with her grandmother's pearl earrings, the only thing she had left of her parents, catching the light. "You look like a princess," Maria said from behind her, tears streaming down her face as she adjusted Isabella's veil. "Mama and Papa would be so proud." Isabella turned to hug her sister, careful not to wrinkle either of their dresses. Maria was her matron of honor, radiant in a gown of deep blue silk that complemented her dark coloring. "Are you sure about this, Bella?" Maria asked quietly. "Really sure? It's not too late to change your mind." Isabella had told Maria everything after the kidnapping, about Dante's real profession, about the dangers and complications that came with loving him, about the choice she was making with her eyes wide open. "I'm sure," Isabella said firmly. "I love him, Maria, and he loves me. Whatever else he might be, I know that." "He makes you happy," Maria admitted. "Happier than I've ever seen you, and God knows he treats you like a queen." That was certainly true. In the 6 months since the warehouse, Dante had surrounded Isabella with love and luxury in equal measure. He'd moved her into his penthouse, had set her up with her own graphic design studio, had made sure that every day she knew how precious she was to him. There had been adjustments, of course. Isabella had had to learn to live with the security detail that accompanied her everywhere, had had to accept that certain parts of Dante's business would always be off-limits to her. But he'd been true to his word. She'd never seen the violent side of his world, though she knew it existed. And Derek Hawthorne had disappeared entirely. Isabella didn't know what had happened to him, and she'd learned not to ask. "It's time," Maria said, looking at the delicate watch on her wrist. "Are you ready?" Isabella looked at herself in the mirror one more time, then nodded. "I'm ready." The church was packed with what seemed like half the city. Dante's family and associates, Isabella's friends and co-workers, and a surprising number of people from the legitimate business world who apparently considered Dante Rossini a valued colleague and friend. The ceremony was being held at the oldest Catholic church in the city, with an archbishop officiating and enough flowers to stock a florist shop for a month. But Isabella only had eyes for the man waiting for her at the altar. Dante stood there in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, looking like every fantasy she'd ever had of Prince Charming, if Prince Charming had been a devastatingly handsome Italian crime boss. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His olive skin was golden in the light streaming through the stained glass windows, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, his smile was brilliant enough to power the city. Isabella walked toward him on the arm of Dante's oldest brother, Marco, who had offered to give her away since she had no father to do it. The music swelled around them, and the hundreds of guests rose to their feet. But all Isabella could see was Dante's face, the love and wonder and possessive satisfaction in his dark eyes. When they reached the altar, Marco kissed Isabella's cheek and placed her hand in Dante's, murmuring something in Italian that made Dante nod seriously. "You're beautiful," Dante whispered as the Archbishop began the ceremony. "The most beautiful bride who ever lived." The ceremony passed in a blur of traditional vows and prayers, but when it came time for the rings, Dante surprised her. Instead of the simple band they'd chosen together, he slipped onto her finger a stunning diamond that must have cost more than most people's houses. "Dante!" Isabella gasped, staring at the ring that sparkled like captured starlight. "Nothing but the best for my wife," he murmured, loud enough for the guests in the front rows to hear and approve. When the Archbishop finally pronounced them husband and wife, Dante's kiss was tender and reverent, but Isabella could feel the passion banked behind it, the promise of what was to come when they were finally alone. The reception was held in the ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel, with a guest list that read, like a who's who, of both legitimate society and the more shadowy world that Dante inhabited. Isabella danced with her new husband, with his brothers, with old friends and new family members, but her favorite moment came during their first dance as husband and wife. "Any regrets, Mrs. Rossini?" Dante asked as they swayed to the music, surrounded by candlelight and the warm wishes of their guests. Isabella looked up into the face of the man she'd married, dangerous and powerful, and completely devoted to her. "Only that it took Derek punching me at Maria's wedding for us to meet," she said with a smile. Dante's arms tightened around her. "I would have found you eventually," he said with absolute certainty. "Somehow, somewhere, I would have found you. You were meant to be mine, Isabella. From the moment you were born, you were meant to be mine." As Isabella looked around the ballroom at their wedding reception, at the faces of people celebrating their love, at the luxury and beauty that surrounded them, at the man who had promised to love and protect her for the rest of their lives, she realized that Derek had been wrong about one thing. She wasn't Dante's victim. She was his partner, his equal, his beloved wife. And if that came with danger and complications and a life that was far from ordinary, well, ordinary had never made her feel this alive, this cherished, this completely and utterly loved. When Dante leaned down to kiss her again, ignoring the cheers and applause of their guests, Isabella kissed him back with all the passion and promise in her heart. She had chosen love over safety, passion over predictability. And as her husband's arms held her close, she knew she would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. After all, some men were worth the risk. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, because I am trying to prove to my mom that I can actually do this. It would mean the world to me. I love you all. Have a nice day.